like the solitary kidney or the polycystic kidney, any horseshoe kidney. So if these are present, then we have to be extra careful while taking the biopsy for these patients. So we have already discussed hematuria. It is either if you find acanthocytes or the red blood cell cast with an elevated serum creatinine level, or if there is any proteinuria of more than 1 gram per day on multiple visits, or if it is more than 3 gram per day in the absence of diabetes, or there can be a rapid increase in proteinuria even with the diabetes. So all of these conditions, they warrant a kidney biopsy. If there is a proteinuria of less than 3 grams per day, but there is an elevated serum creatinine level with no clear comorbid conditions, in these cases also a renal biopsy is indicated. In cases of acute kidney injury, if there is acute tubular injury, persistent injury despite the reversal of the cause, the serum creatinine is not returning back to the baseline. So we have to go on and look out for the cause. In that case also we do a renal biopsy. For the evaluation of chronic kidney disease patients, if there is a rapid elevation in the serum creatinine level, or there is a new onset of hematuria or proteinuria. So what are the contraindications for the same? The absolute contraindications include the presence of any bleeding diathesis that the patient might have, any uncontrolled severe hypertension. If the patient is uncooperative, then we will not go ahead with the procedure. If there is a solitary native kidney, then we can, but due to the risk of anesthesia associated with the open biopsy, the risk outweigh the benefits in case of open nephrectomy. The relative contraindications for renal biopsy include severe azotemia, any anatomic abnormalities of the kidney, skin infection over the biopsy site, drugs that may alter the hemostasis, any anticoagulants that the patient might be on. If the patient is a pregnant female, if there is a urinary tract infection. So all of these are the relative contraindications. Then in morbid obese patients, the percutaneous biopsy, it may be more difficult, and the kidney, it may be poorly visualized. So how do we do this? The renal biopsy, usually percutaneous technique is preferred, in which we use a ultrasound probe to localize the lower pole of the kidney. And the lower pole of the kidney is the one from where we take the biopsy. Usually the left kidney is preferred. Then a pen mark is used to indicate the point of entry of the biopsy needle. Before the procedure, the skin is sterilized with povidone iodine, and a fenestrated sheet is placed over the area to maintain a sterile field. Local anesthetic is infiltrated into the skin at the point previously marked. So this is the kidney. An ultrasound transducer is placed, and this is the biopsy needle. We take the biopsy from the lower pole of the kidney. Usually we take out 2 cores of the renal tissue. So after the procedure, the patient should maintain supine posture, and we have to monitor the clinical status, vital signs, and the urine color over the next 12 to 14 hours. An alternative method of renal biopsy in patients in whom the percutaneous is not indicated, these include the open biopsy with the visualization of the kidney, or we can take the endovascular biopsy, which can be either transjugular or transfemoral, and we can also take the laparoscopic biopsies. So coming to the complications of the percutaneous renal biopsy, most common complication is hematuria. Then the patient might also develop perinephric hematomas, or the arteriovenous fistulas may develop at the site. Post biopsy, patient can develop aneurysms, infections, then ileus, lacerations of the other organs, and puncture of the renal pelvis. If there were any stones initially, they might get dislodged. Pancreatitis can occur, pneumothorax, and dispersion of the renal carcinomas. So in the picture, you can see that these are the linear true cut cores. So 2 cores ideally should be taken, and grossly the arrow marked areas are the ones, the reddish ones. These show the glomeruli. So adequate biopsy, we have to look out for the cortical region in which the glomerulus are present. So the adequacy depends upon the amount of cortex that is present and the nature of the disease. Ideally, 10 to 15 glomeruli should be present in a core biopsy. In case of children, more number of glomeruli are to be present, and they are larger and closely opposed. In chronic kidney disease patients, the glomeruli, again, they are very closely approximated. In the juxtamedullary region, it is important in cases of focal segmental glomerulonephritis, in which the outer two-thirds of the could see the reddish. I'll just go back to the previous slide. So, like in this case, you can see these are the glomeruli. If these are grossly identified well and good, then the tissue can be divided so that the renal cortex is placed in each of the vials. And 1 millimeter cubes, they are removed from each of the end of both the cores. So when we receive a core, we have to perform 3 procedures. In that, we have to take tissue for light microscopy, we have to separate out the tissue for immunofluorescence, and thirdly for the electron microscopic examination. So from each of the core, we take out tissue 1 mm cube. And for the electron microscopy, we take the sample in glutaraldehyde. For immunofluorescence, we take it in the Michel's medium. And for light microscopy, we take the sample in neutral buffered formalin. So if only one core is obtained, then the 1 mm cubes, they should be removed from each of the end and placed in glutaraldehyde for the electron microscopy. The ends in the electron microscopic media of glutaraldehyde. The remainder of the core, it should be divided into 3 parts, which the outer 2/3, they are submitted for immunofluorescence, and the middle third is kept for the light microscopic evaluation. So in case you receive only a single core, then the ends, they are to be taken out for the electroscopy of divided 3 halves. One is kept for microscopic evaluation, and the other 2/3, they are given out for immunofluorescence. While if we receive 2 cores, then electron microscopy, immunofluorescence, the ends are kept for electron microscopy, one light scope for immunofluorescence. So once we have separated it out for the various medias, keep the tissue. For the formalin fixed tissue, the embedding is done in paraffin or resin, depending upon the ability. They can be either embedded in paraffin or in resin available. And then serial sections, thin sections of 2 to 3 microns thickness, they are cut. Now, how do we cut these sections? We take, suppose this is the renal biopsy. So we take 5 slides, we put them sequentially for HND, for silver stain, for PAS or PAS stain, for Mason's trichrome stain, and the last one again for HND. On each of these slides, we take out 3 serial slices, first, second, and third on each of these slices. So we can get a better representation of the deeper sections that we have to evaluate. So apart from these 4 stains, we can also perform Congo red stain and the Verhoef stain. So this was all about the kidney biopsy, how to do it, what are the indication, contraindications, and how we dissect the core. Now coming to the case discussions. So I have 4 cases. The first one is of a 5-year-old boy weighing around 30 kgs. And he presented with the history of fever, cough, swelling over the face, and a decreased urine output. So the fever in this case was very high grade. It was continuous and associated with chills and rigors. Patient had productive cough, which was whitish in color and not foul smelling. Swelling over the face, patient described initially it was periorganics and it gradually progressed to the entire more during the morning phase, and eventually by the evening it decreased. And the patient also had polyuria. I just covered the laboratory parameters. Could you hear that? There might be some network issue. Just let me know when you can hear. Okay, Shashwat. Now we can hear. Okay. I'll continue. Okay. So in the laboratory parameters, the patient had, in the urinary findings, the patient had significant proteinuria. Creatinine, however, was in the normal range. Serum electrolyte were more or less in the normal range. Patient had hyperlipidemia. He had increased cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, triglycerides. They were all increased. APDT was also increased to the tune of 47.7 seconds, and serum albumin, it was in the lower range. So hypoalbuminemia was also there in this patient. So these were the findings. In the first figure, this one, the test that is done, this is your heat coagulation test on the urine sample that we do for grading of, qualitative grading of proteinuria. So this first one is your absolutely clear urine sample having no protein. The second one from the right side, this is grade 1 proteinuria, grade 2 proteinuria, grade 3 and grade 4 proteinuria. So in this patient, we had grade 4 proteinuria, and these kind of structures were seen. So can anyone tell me what this is? Vivek Kumar says this is minimal change disease. Very good. So these are your lipid casts. Hyaline cast, these are not hyaline cast. You can see fatty cast or lipid cast. These are the fatty cast. And on the kidney biopsy, so we can see a single intact glomerulus with the capillaries, and there is no increase in the mesangial matrix. There is no increase in the cellularity. So this appears like a normal glomerulus. So absence of proliferation on light microscopy. However, when we see the electron microscopic picture of this, so the arrow marked areas, so there is effacement of the foot process. These findings you will find in a case of nephrotic syndrome due to minimal change disease. Minimal change we say because on light microscopy, there is minimal differences that you find from a normal glomerulus. So only electron microscopy will tell you whether the patient has any effacement of the foot process. Then further we can do the gene analysis and arrive at a diagnosis of minimal change disease. So moving on to the next. Urine analysis. In the workup of kidney disease patients, it is a very important investigation. So proteinuria is the earliest examination. So proteinuria is when we have the urinary protein excretion of more than 150 milligrams per day, or an albumin excretion of more than 30 milligrams per day. So depending upon how much protein is excreted out per day, then we can grade the proteinuria into 1 plus till 4 plus. So normally there is no or trace amount of albumin that can be present, about 0 to 2 RBCs per High-Park field, similar in the WBCs, and occasional cast. So the normal cast that can appear in a normal patient, those are your hyaline cast. Any other cast, they are abnormal. Okay. So in case of nephrotic syndrome, nephrotic range proteinuria is more than 3.5 grams per day. Okay. So more than 4 plus albumin, if you are finding in the urinary protein heat test, so that is nephrotic range proteinuria. So nephrotic syndrome, usually you do not find any RBCs. If you are finding RBCs, numerous dysmorphic RBCs, that is indicative of the glomerular pathology, and you find these in cases of acute glomerulonephritis. So if there is no infection, no urinary tract infection, WBCs they will not be seen. So WBCs you will find if there is acute pyelonephritis. So in case of nephrotic syndrome, apart from the hyaline cast, you may get fatty cast, waxy cast, or the epithelial cast. And also you may see oval fat bodies. They may be lipid in the urine as well, which is known as lipiduria. So in case of acute glomerulonephritis, you can see the red cell cast or the granular cast. And the urine in these patients will be a smoky urine, or because of the presence of blood, hematuria. So when we have proteinuria detected either by the reagent strip, sulfosalicylic acid test, or the heat coagulation test, then if it is positive, if the test for protein comes out to be positive, we go ahead with the examination of urine. And if we see the red cells, which are dysmorphic, or the red cell cast, then usually it is indicative of acute glomerulonephritis. If we find any white cells, white blood cell cast, or the bacteria, that is more suggestive of pyelonephritis. White cells without white cell cast and bacteria, these are usually seen in interstitial nephritis, in which the uh, uh, interstitial nephritis, in which eosinophils will be the predominant WBCs that you see. If there are granular and waxy cast, usually seen in case of chronic renal diseases, while lipid in urine or the oval fat bodies and fatty cast, we just saw that they can be seen in the nephrotic syndrome. So this idiopathic nephrotic syndrome, it is how do we uh, um, Just a second. So idiopathic nephrotic syndrome, by definition, these patients will have massive proteinuria. So due to massive proteinuria, there will be circulating albumin levels, which will be low, and that will result in edema in these patients. Because of the contraction in the plasma volume, there will be subsequent stimulation of the renin-angiotensin aldosterone pathway, and the ADH secretion will happen, which will lead to further retention of sodium and water in the tubules, which contributes to the extension and maintenance of edema in these patients. Then you also have these patients also have disordered lipid metabolism, in which we saw that all the VLDL, IDL, LDL, triglycerides, cholesterol, they are increased. Then these patients, they have a hypercoagulable state, which might be due to either loss of anti-thrombotic proteins in the urine, or due to the increased synthesis of the prothrombotic factors. Then these patients are also susceptible to infections, susceptible to infections due to the low immunoglobulin levels because of their impaired synthesis. So that was about nephrotic syndrome, minimal change disease. Now coming to the second case, this is of a 60-year-old homosexual man who was admitted with the complaints of generalized edema and pallor. There was no other history of drug addiction, either oral or IV, and the patient was not febrile. Pulse rate was also normal, respiratory rate normal, and blood pressure, they were all normal. Patient had pallor, however, and had generalized edema. On the chest examination, there were decreased breath sounds in the right infrascapular area. Patient had gross ascites, and CVS, CNS, they were normal. So coming to the investigations, TLC was normal, hemoglobin was reduced, a platelet count of 1.64 lakh, again in the normal category. Urea, creatinine, they are raised. Okay, 67 milligram per deciliter and 2.8 milligram per deciliter of creatinine, both are raised. Hypoalbuminemia, then total protein of 4.3 gram per deciliter. Liver enzymes are normal, PFT was within normal limits. On the TriDot examination, patient was found to have HIV-1 positive. Okay. Then the urine examination was done for this patient, in which albumin was 4+, and there were RBCs 12 to 15 per high par field. Polymorphs were also seen, 8 to 10 per high par field. And the total 24-hour urinary protein, it was found to be 5 grams. On ultrasound, the kidneys, they were enlarged with loss of the corticomedullary differentiation. There was right-sided pleural effusion, and ECG was within normal limits in this patient. So a patient, HIV patient with nephrotic range proteinuria. So this is the PAS state. This is PAS, and in this you see that the glomerulus, they are segmentally sclerosed. That is, part of a glomerulus is sclerosed, and in both of them the upper half is involved. And over here we can see the arrow marked area. This is the hyaline insinuation. Lipid vacuoles are present in the sclerotic areas. So etiology, diagnosis. Okay, FSGS. So very good, all those who could diagnose. Drug induced, HIV induced, fine. So coming to the discussion of this. So you can either have primary or idiopathic focal sclerosing focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. You can have hereditary because of sickle cell disease, viral infections like HIV, HCV, cytomegalo, Epstein-Barr, parvovirus, B19, some drugs like heroin, interferon alpha, lithium, gold, then ischemic causes like renal artery stenosis, hypertensive kidney disease, then calcineurin inhibitors, acute chronic graft rejection. So all of these are the etiological factors implicated in the FSGS. Then the inherited forms of nephrotic syndrome, in which you find the mutations in the podocin alpha-actinin and your TRPC6 genes. So these are the various causes of FSGS. So coming to the third case, Here we have an 11-year female brought to the hospital with complaints of blood in urine for 1 month, and swelling for 1 month. On his history of the present illness, there was gross hematuria for 2 days, polar color, and it was throughout the urine stream. It was painless and it subsided spontaneously. There was swelling of the body, initially again periorbital, and then involving the entire body. So swelling of the body, if it starts in the periorbital region and then involves the whole body, it is more significant in your renal pathologies. There was no history of fever, any rash, alopecia, photosensitivity, arthritis, jaundice, vomiting, anorexia, or weight loss. So by the negative history, we are trying to rule out any connective tissue etiology. So vitals were stable for this patient, weight was low, reduced, blood pressure was increased, 146/84. There was pallor, there was edema, no organomegaly, and systemic examination, no other abnormality was detected. In the investigation, hemoglobin is low, platelets are a little higher, 4.5, 4.5 is the cutoff for the platelets. So because of the anemia, there may be reactive thrombocytosis. TLC is raised, and with the predominance of polymorphs. Then urea creatinine is normal for this patient. Triglycerides, again, they are increased. Triglycerides and cholesterol. Urinary protein is 245 milligrams per 24 hours. RBC is 8 to 10. No anti-nuclear antibodies were found. C3, C4, they were also low, and tridot was also negative. So by these findings, we just have anemia in this patient. WBCs are increased, and we have hyperlipidemia, proteinuria, and some amount of RBCs, hematuria. So coming to this is again showing in the first picture that we saw in case of minimal change disease, the glomerulus, compared to that, it is hypercellular. So there is proliferation in the form of mesangial cell proliferation. Okay, basement membrane is thickened, and segmental splitting is seen. Again in this picture, this is silver stain, and we can see the duplication of the glomerular basement membrane. Okay, so in this case, you can see the thickened out glomerular basement membrane, and in the silver stain, we can appreciate the splitting of the glomerular membrane. On the immunofluorescence, there were deposits were seen in the capillary walls, which were segmental, coarsely granular to globular. Okay, and this is the electron microscopic picture of this patient. So on electron microscopy, we can see the characteristic tram track appearance. So this case is MPGN. Very good. Khyati. So many of you have already answered. So this is MPGN. So the type patterns that you see on histopathology include the thickening of the glomerular basement membrane, mesangial cell hypercellularity, endocapillary proliferation, which might also include the infiltration by the leukocytes, then the double contouring of the glomerular capillary walls, and lobulation or glomerulonephritis. So MPGN, depending upon the immunofluorescence pattern, we have type 1, type 2, or type 3. And on electron microscopy, we can see where exactly the deposits are present. So in type 1, you will have the subendothelial and mesangial depositions. In the type 2, you will have the intramembranous deposits. In type 3, subendothelial as well as subepithelial, intramembranous, mesangial, all type of deposits can be present. And the immunofluorescence type 3, only C3 is present, or C3 along with the IgG is present. Then in type 2, you have only C3 linearly in the glomerular basement membrane. And then in type 3, you have only C3 or C3 along with immunoglobulin G in the granular membranous-like pattern. In some cases, you can also find the IgM, IgA, and C1q. Okay, I think a slide I missed in this one. So this case was a normal 25-year-old male who had microscope, just the investigation part I have, I'm sorry for that. In investigation, there was microscopic hematuria. So RBCs, when you are provided for your practical examination, then RBCs, they appear as roundish, around 7 micron size, roundish structures without any nuclear contouring that may be present. So in this field, I can see one neutrophil by the cursor I'm pointing out. So this might be a neutrophil. Rest all these are your RBCs. And dysmorphic RBCs were also present. So dysmorphic RBCs pointing towards your glomerular etiology. Then proteinuria was 1.5 gram per day, and there was this anemia was present. Anti-GBM antibodies were present. ANCA was negative. On chest X-ray, the alveolar infiltrates were present, and BAL of this patient showed siderophages. So this is the light microscopy and the electron microscopy of this. So you might get a slide of crescents in your exam. So crescents are basically the epithelial cell proliferations in a crescentric manner. So this is a glomerulus in which the upper half is crescent-like with epithelial cells and leukocytes in the Bowman capsule. So on the in immunofluorescence, you can see the IgG ka linear deposits along the glomerular basement membrane. So this patient had lesions in the lung and lesions in the kidney and anti-GBM antibodies. So a diagnosis of Goodpasture syndrome. Okay, so this is rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis, and it is a clinical syndrome of glomerular etiology, then progressive loss of renal function over a short period of time, and acute renal failure. The patient goes into within hours to 20 within hours to days, and morphologically on light microscopy, extensive crescent formations. So how do we classify our RPGA? It is type 1, type 2, type 3, depending upon the antibodies particularly. So type 1 will have the anti-glomerular basement membrane antibodies, which is usually either renal limited or seen in case of Goodpasture along with the lung involvement. In type 2, you can have the immune complex deposition. It may be either post-infectious in case of lupus, in henox-colon purpura, IgG nephropathy, and the type 3 is posse-immune. It does not have the GBM antibody or any immune complex association. So these are your ANCA associated, either C ANCA or P ANCA, and these include Wegener's granulomatosis and microscopic polyangiitis. So that is all about the cases. Any doubt? Or we can end it over here. Let me just take your attendance.